Hello, my name is Aviva, and today I wanted to share with you all of the books that I read in the second half of October. So I read a lot of books in October. I think it was like my largest reading month of the year. And it's funny because I'm almost positive that last year in October was my largest reading month also. So I don't know what it is about October, but I got a lot of reading done. And I actually did a mid-month wrap up where I shared all the books that I read in the first half of October. So if you wanted to see that, I'm going to make sure that that video is linked down below. But today I'm just going to share with you all the books that I read in the second half of October. I have 13 books to share with you. Happens to be some of them were in vlogs, so like you might have heard me talk about them already, but just in case you haven't seen all of my videos or if you're new to my channel, I am going to talk about them again. So first up, I have The Darkest Temptation by Danielle Laurie. So this is the third book in the Maid series. I read the first two in the beginning of October, and they were the last two books that I talked about in my mid-month wrap up. So if you wanted to hear about those, I recommend watching that video. But anyway, this is the third and final book in the series. There might be one more coming out. I don't know. I don't remember what it was like when I looked it up on GOODREADS. I think there is one more. Now that I say it, I'm almost positive. But anyway, I read the first three because those are the only ones that are out. And this one happened to have been a kidnapping, Stockholm Syndrome-y sort of mafia romance. And it had a little bit of rape for like trigger warnings. And I bet there were a lot of other trigger warnings in this one. This one was a really dark one, but I very much enjoyed it. This was my first mafia romance series that I ever read, and I was a huge fan. Overall, I give this series 4 stars. I had given book 1 5 stars, book 2 3 stars, and I think I gave this one 4 stars or 5 stars. I really can't remember, but I do remember very much enjoying it, so I was a big fan. After that, I read The Club Obsession by Lauren Rose. So this is the first book in a 4-book series, but when I picked it up, I originally thought it was a companion series. So I only had bought book 1 and I decided to read it. And then I was halfway through and I realized that this story isn't about to end. Like, it's going to keep going. So I freaked out. I went online to try and order book 2, 3, and 4. And book 3 wasn't available anywhere. So I was like freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, I'm really into this story, but like, I'm not going to be able to read the whole thing. What do I do? So I messaged the author on Instagram, and she so kindly sent me like a whole package of all of the books in this series, as well as like a spin-off series and like a bunch of bookmarks and like a whole big thing, which I'm so grateful for. It was like the nicest thing in the world. But basically, I only read book 1 at the moment because I read it and then the other books didn't show up for like over a week later, and I just like didn't get to it yet. So I did put them all in my November TBR. So hopefully I'll continue on with the series in November because now I own all of the books. But basically, this is just a really steamy romance about this sex club. This guy wants to apply to be in this sex club, so he fills in this application, and basically this girl who works for the sex club reads his application and basically wants to send him a private message based off of what he says. So she like makes this whole fake email, she sends him a message, and then all of a sudden he's really intrigued by what she said, so he tries and starts to track her down, and then the story goes from there, and they basically have like their whole romance. So book 1 was really good and really steamy, but it also had like a very interesting plot going on the whole time, like surrounded by this sex club. And then at the end of book 1, I totally saw that it's going to start going in like this whole other direction, and it's going to get like really plot heavy, and I am really down. So the end of this book definitely left off on a cliffhanger, so like I really got to get to the rest of the series really soon because I loved book 1. I think I gave it like 4 stars at the time. I flew through it. It's a really small book, and basically if you want an extremely steamy book that also has a really good plot going on, I recommend this one. So somewhere around here in the month, I kind of forgot exactly when it was, but it doesn't matter. But anyway, I ended up finishing the second book in the Miss Peregrines House for Peculiar Children like series. I don't know what it's called. It has such a long name. But anyway, I've been listening to them on audiobook. At the moment, I'm currently at the end of book 3. I literally have like 2 hours left, which is so sad because I wanted to be able to say like, oh yeah, I read like book 2 and book 3 in October, but I didn't end up finishing it. It's okay. So anyway, I did officially finish the second book and I very much enjoyed it. I really like this whole like series in general. I think it has a great story. It's so much fun to read. I'm like overall a huge fan, and I'm just happy to know that there's still like 3 more books that I get to read, before it's over. So I'm going to keep on listening to the audiobooks until I'm done with the series. But basically in the month of October, I did finish the second book in the series. So after that, I actually started reading the 5 books that were in my reading vlog this month, which was 5-star predictions. So the first book that was in that reading vlog, I'm gonna make sure it's linked down below in case you just wanna like watch all that and hear like really detailed thoughts as I read the next 5 books I'm about to talk about. But anyway, the first book is Not Pretending Anymore by V. Keeland and Penelope Ward. So this is a roommate fake dating sort of book. It was really good. It's basically these 2 people, a girl and a boy, decide to start to be roommates, and they think it's okay because, you know, they both have crushes on other people. So they decide that they're going to start fake dating to get their crushes jealous. But obviously, once that happens and, you know, their plans actually work, they start to actually fall for each other instead. So it's a really good fake dating book. I was a huge fan of this, and it's really funny that the book has a naked man on the cover because this is probably like the least steamiest book in the entire stack that I'm talking about today. So I loved this book. I highly recommend it. I gave it 5 stars, and if you're into fake dating, then you should definitely read this book. Next up, I read Culti by Mariana Zapata, which I absolutely loved. I think this is my favorite Mariana Zapata book that I've read so far. I have read All Roads Lead Here and The Wall of Winnipeg, and I really do think that this one topped both of those. This is a soccer sports romance between this girl who had a crush on this famous soccer player her whole life. She's kind of like looked up to him. He's the reason that she became a pro soccer player. And anyway, now that she's an adult, this pro soccer player becomes one of her coaches. And once she meets him, she realizes that she actually like absolutely hates his guts. Like, he's a horrible person and she doesn't like being around him. And then obviously a romance is somehow going to bloom between the 2 of them. So this is a really slow burn romance. All of Mariana Zapata books are really slow, but they are so worth it in the end. Like, literally, I love this book so freaking much. I cannot wait to forget it enough so that I could do a reread of it. Next up, I read Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover, which I very much liked. At the moment that I finished it, gave it 5 stars because I thought the ending really pulled this whole book together. But then once I like sat on it for a while, I decided to bump it down to 4 stars, mostly because I kind of predicted this entire book from the 2nd chapter. And even though I really enjoyed reading it, it was a really fun story in general, it was a little bit too predictable for me. And at the end of the day, like, I don't know, for some reason, I don't think it should hit that 5-star mark, especially when it's in a pile of other 5-star books that I've read. So it gets a very comfortable 4 stars. And it's basically just about this girl who ends up having a relationship with like her brother's best friend. And they kind of do like this whole like friends with benefits thing because they're kind of really attracted to each other, but like they don't actually like each other. And then obviously friends with benefits isn't going to work out and they're going to actually be together by the end of the book. It's a happily ever after book, but Colleen Hoover is very well known to like kind of throw you for a loop. Like, she gives you a story and she tells you what's on the back of the book, and then the story kind of goes in like a whole other direction and gets like super serious and like not what you expected. So that is kind of what I expected from this book, and you kind of did get it, except I did predict it from the beginning of the book. So I don't know if that was just me or if it was the book that I found to be a little bit predictable, but either way, it was a solid read. I highly recommend it, and I do understand the hype that this book gets. After that, I read Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. So this book has been really hyped up for a while. I see like this book all over like Book Talk, and I see this on a lot of people's like 5-star favorites sort of thing. And I very much wanted to read it for a while, and there was a book sale, so I finally bought it, and I read it, and unfortunately I didn't love it. I think I gave it like 3 or 4 stars. I thought that it was a really good love story, but I don't know, I wasn't that into it in the way that I know other people are really into it. It kind of like threw me for a loop. It kind of felt very high schooly and like babyish in the way of like writing and how everything played out, except we were following adults, and it kind of made sense like once you actually read the book. It's about this guy who is deaf, and then this girl kind of like moves to this small town where this guy lives, and they end up like running into each other, and everyone's like, oh, stay away from him, like he's really weird, and she's like, I don't see anything wrong with him. So then they become friends, and then obviously a romance is gonna bloom, and then you kind of get to see like their love story. So it was a really cute love story. It wasn't a romance, it was like an actual love story, which I found to be very like heartwarming and sweet, and it was adorable, but it wasn't a 5-star read for me. Next, I read Enemies by Tejan. So this was an enemies to lovers sports romance. It was following these 2 people who grew up with each other and were best friends, and then kind of when they hit like puberty, they kind of started hating each other, and now the girl is in college and the guy is a pro football player, and they grew up in like South Dakota, North Dakota, something like that, and basically now they're both in Texas. She's in college college. He's a pro football player, and their families are basically like, you guys are both really near each other. You should connect and stuff. And they're like, we hate each other. We don't want anything to do with each other. So no. And then something very devastating happens in this girl's life, and nobody could get a hold of her. So this guy basically goes and breaks the news of what happened to her. And then the story kind of goes from there, and he's gonna basically take care of her after, this devastating thing happened and all that sort of stuff. So this book was actually very different than I expected it to be, but in a great way. I loved this book so much. I gave it an easy 5 stars, but I will say that it wasn't what I expected, even though after I read the back of the book and like the whole synopsis after reading the book, I'm like, oh yeah, they did hint to what the entire book was about. But reading it, it was kind of so vague that it didn't like click in my head as to what was actually going to happen. So all I'm going to say is that this book was really good, but also it might throw you for a loop and like not be what you expected, but like in a good way. So if you're into enemies to lovers and you like sports romances, I 100% recommend reading this, but it's not going to be what you expected. At least it wasn't what I expected. So after that, I ended up reading A Shadow in the Ember by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So this came out this month. I read it a week after it arrived at my door, and unfortunately, I absolutely hated this. So I actually made an entire reading vlog, watching myself, read this whole book and tell you my thoughts as I read it. So I'll have that video linked down below in case you want to see like 20 minutes of me ranting about what was wrong with this book. But overall, I'm going to sum it up and say that I thought that this book was extremely info dumpy, that it was basically a carbon copy of From Blood and Ash, which is the book that is like involved in this series. Like it's from the same universe, but this takes place before From Blood and Ash. Anyway, I thought this book was like exactly like From Blood and Ash, just like in a worse way. Like literally there were so many elements that were so unique to From Blood and Ash that she basically took and like reorganized and put it into just another book. So it was way too familiar for me, and I wasn't a fan of seeing all of those similarities. Like I would have rather see an entirely new story that had really good tropes going on that were different and unique to their own story. And then on top of it, this is a fantasy romance, and I wasn't a fan of the romance. I thought that it was really, really basic. It was a little bit like insta-lusty, and even though it explained it in the book why it was that way, I just thought that it was a really basic romance, especially compared to From Blood and Ash, which I thought was really unique and I was a huge fan of. So basically everything about this book I really didn't like, and I do know that I'm not the only person that felt that way. I spoke to a lot of people who already read this book, and I feel like it's a 50-50 of if people really liked it or really hated it. A lot of people said that they really liked it, even though they see everything that I said about this book, like that I didn't like. They're like, I get that, but I still loved it because it was still in the same world as From Blood and Ash, and I was a fan. And to all the people who feel that way, I'm very happy you enjoyed it. But then to all the people that agree with me on everything I just said, thank you for agreeing with me, because I just think that this book could have been so much better and it was a little bit of a fail. So after that, I ended up reading The Perfect First by Maya Hughes, and unfortunately, I absolutely hated this book also. So after this book, I was like officially in a reading slump, but we'll get to that in a second. But basically, this is the second book that I ever read by Maya Hughes. This is a football romance, like a college football, very classic romance, very off-campus vibes, except it was like a worse version, and I just very much didn't like it. I really didn't think that it was worth the read, and I kind of felt the same way about this book as I did the other book that I read by Maya Hughes, which was called Shameless King, and that was it was a hockey romance. And these are both like first books in a series, so I was really excited to find them, because if I liked them, there were so many other books I was able to read that like were sports romances, like very off-campus vibes. But basically, I hated both of them, and I definitely think that it was just Maya Hughes' writing. Like, we just didn't click. I thought that even though it had a lot of really good elements to the story that was like very interesting to make it like a really good romance, it didn't play out right for me. Like, I didn't feel the connection. I didn't love how the romance happened, and I didn't love the writing, and just basically everything about it. It's like the elements were there, but it didn't click for me. And basically, after I realized that both books I felt the same way for, I've decided that this is the last book I'm going to read by Maya Hughes, because I'm really not a fan. So after that, I ended up reading Not My Match by Isla Madden Mills. So it's funny because like this book is the beginning of another reading vlog that I did that's going to be coming out right after this video. I basically got myself into a reading slump. I was in a really bad mood, so I'm like, let's watch myself get out of a reading slump. And this was the first book that I read in that vlog. So, you know, sneak peek of what video is coming out on Friday. But basically, this is the second book in a companion series. And I didn't realize that until I started reading it. And then somebody told me on Instagram, like, oh, did you read the first one? I'm like, what first one? And that was a little bit of a mistake for me. I'm usually so good at like researching the books that I read. And for some reason, I thought that I could read this book without reading the first one. Or maybe I even forgot that there was a first one. I don't really know. Anyway, I picked this up and it was a little bit of a stupid move because it kind of started out where both characters were already like into each other. And I really like the buildup of that, like all of the sparks igniting at the beginning of a romance. And the problem is I'm almost positive that all of those initial sparks and initial like first meetings happened in book one and I missed it. And then I jumped into the beginning of this book and they were already into each other and he was already really possessive of her and like all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, I'm missing something. Like this was an amazing book and it had a really good story and everything that I wanted was there, except I didn't feel the connection to the romance because I missed something. So I was a little bit upset about that, especially because it is a companion series. And usually when you read companion series, like you kind of get the beginning of each book. Like that's why it's a companion and not a series. Like it's because you're able technically to pick up just one book out of the series and have a full romance there for you, you know? So I was a little bit upset that that happened to me because I do think that I wasted this book. I didn't even give it a star rating because I really do think if I read book one in this series and then read book two, this one would have ended up getting like a 4 or 5 stars because it really was there and it was really good. I was missing something and therefore I really didn't enjoy it. But to be fair, I was also in a bit of a reading slump, so that was affecting my mood and how I was connecting to reading at the time. So for a jumble of reasons, I read this book, but I don't really know how I feel about it. So after that, I ended up reading Boss Man by V. Keeland, and oh my God, did I love this book. This is like a workplace environment, like dirty office romance sort of book. It literally says a dirty office romance novel on the cover. I didn't make that up. This was really, really good. It was basically about this girl who she's on a date in this restaurant and she's really not liking her date. So she goes to the bathroom and starts complaining on the phone to her friend, like, you know, give me one of those calls to get me out of this date, like an emergency call sort of thing. And this guy overhears her and is like, saying that she's really rude and she's kind of like a bitch and like who does that on a date, like it's very hard to get a reservation in this, you know, restaurant and all that sort of stuff. And she's like, who the hell are you? Like stay out of my business, stop overhearing me on a call that I'm not even like talking to you sort of thing, you know. Anyway, she ends up going back to sit with her date and then this guy comes over to her table and like basically like intrudes on her date and is like pretending that they know each other and starts making up all of these stories about their childhood. And she's like, what the hell is going on? And she kind of starts to go along with it. And then basically like at the end of the night, she's very intrigued by him, but like, she's like, okay, I don't know you. And then she just like kind of leaves. And then a month later, she ends up like bumping into him again and he ends up becoming her boss. And basically once they're working with each other, it turns into a very steamy office romance because they're very attracted to each other and it gets really good. I was a huge fan of this book. And one thing I've noticed of V. Keeland, because this was the second book that I read by her, is that she likes to put in some more intense topics into her books to kind of stay away from that like rom-com-y vibe. So in this book, there was some like things that both characters had in their past that kind of like affected their present day, like, you know, some traumatic things in their life. And you kind of get to see that play out and how it affects them now. And I very much liked it. So it kind of gave it like a little bit of texture into the story so that it wasn't just like a really steamy, you know, rom-com, like put a smile on your face sort of book. Like it was that, but it also had a little bit more of like a serious tone to it. So overall, I was a huge fan of this. Like literally couldn't recommend it more. If it sounds like something up your alley, like please read it. I don't think you'll regret it. And the last book that I'm going to share with you is Brutal Prince by Sophie Lark. So this is the first book in a 6-book companion series. And oh my God, did I love it. So this is a mafia romance. It's like a mafia romance series. And the first book is basically an arranged marriage, enemies to lovers sort of thing. This girl basically burns down the library of a rival mafia's house. And then instead of starting a war between like both rival mafias, they decide that they're going to like have an arranged marriage between the girl that burned down the library and then like, you know, the son that lives in the house where the library was burnt down. And they basically both hate each other because like something happens when the library was burnt down and whatever. It was like a whole big thing. It doesn't really matter, but basically they're very much enemies. And throughout this book, they end up having an arranged marriage, and then they basically turn into lovers. And it's also a mafia romance, so it has all of those like mafia elements that you're looking for, like the possessiveness and all of the guns and the violence and, you know, all of the illegal stuff and things like that. It was a really good book, but what I very much liked about this is that it had a very normal sound to it. Like it felt very normal, except you were reading a mafia romance. Like this was only my second one that I read. I had read the whole Sweetest Oblivion, the Maid series that I talked about at the beginning of this video, and that one was a very like dark, very intense mafia romance, which I was a huge fan of, but this one had a very much more natural, normal feel to it. Like it felt like a normal story, except there was actually like mafia stuff going on, and it was like a little bit intense in the sense of like everything that you would expect from a mafia book. So I was just a huge fan of it. I don't know if you understood what I said, but basically it was really good. I gave this 5 stars. I read it in one sitting, and I seriously have 0 complaints for this book. So yeah, that's the last book that I read in October. I am curious to know if you read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, or maybe let me know what you read in October. What was your favorite read? Let me know down below, because maybe I'll add it to my TBR. But anyway, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. And anyway, thank you for watching this video, and until next time, enjoy reading.